we've had our MMS program active for about 7 months now, and we've seen a lot of value and savings from that, and that's really what I'm going to present today. Understand that I'm a chemist by training, so I'm not an economist, but I do know economists quite well. In fact, I took 3 hunting one time, and my dog flushed out a bird, and the first economist goes and he shoots way in front of the bird. Second economist stands up and he shoots his shotgun and it's way behind the bird. And the third economist gets up and he says, "We got it!" I know it's a bad joke, but there's only one other profession that could be as wrong as often as economists are and still have a job, and that's the weatherman. So please take my return on investment with somewhat of a grain of salt. But today what I really want to talk to you about is the history of EVMS and MMS in Montana. Now they're intertwined. And they're intertwined because AgileAssets came to us after they won the bid to produce our maintenance management system for us and said, "Hey, guys, combine them, put them all on the same platform." And I'm glad we did, and I don't regret it. And so part of this story does include our equipment system. I'm going to talk about the legacy system and the interactions that we had to do and how really paper heavy it was. I'll talk about our interfaces, and I have come to realize that interfaces are a bit of a dirty word for software providers. They don't like them, and I completely understand why. But the interfaces have saved us a lot of time and money and paid us in dividends. I'll talk a little bit about cost benefit. Again, this is not an economist cost benefit, it's a chemist cost benefit. And then I'll talk about earning value. So the history of EVMS. EVMS came on board before, with Agile, before our maintenance system, and it happened, I think, in early 2004 is when it came online. It replaced, in EVMS, sorry, is fleet. That's another way to talk about it, so we're all speaking the same language. And it replaced a legacy system that was mainframe and DOS-based. The system was actually horrid, and it came online and solved a bunch of problems for the Equipment Bureau. And they liked it so much they didn't upgrade it once until 2014, I think, was the next upgrade. So I think we're in version 1, and then we jumped to version 7 in 2014. No joke, I really do believe that's about what it was. But at that time, we'd also put out the maintenance side of my business, put out an RFP for MMS. And Agile did win it. In 2015, again, like I said, Agile came and said, you're going to get some savings if you combine the two systems. And of course, I'm probably more of the trust but verify. I'm like, sure it will. However, it did pay us off some dividends, and you'll see that here in the presentation. So MMS, the history of MMS. I wanted to make sure I was on the correct slide here. The history of MMS. 1983, we built our legacy system, and that was again another DOS-based system, mainframe system. It was incredibly paper-heavy. System was designed to capture what every maintenance system is designed to capture: labor, equipment, material, contracted costs. No surprise. It was all dependent on employees writing down accurate information. And in the early 90s, we upgraded. We went to spreadsheets for the guys in the field, and we converted to an Oracle database. So the guys in the field would put everything on a piece of paper, then a spreadsheet, and then go to send these into the office, and they would enter those in. MMS was entered by the division office into Oracle, and at that point we could get reports out of it. So data was reviewed also by the central office for accuracy, and that's consumed a lot of Kirsten's time. She came here from Montana. She runs the MMS system, ran the legacy system, and runs our current system. So what led us to replace it? A great deal of our reports. So when we put out our RFP, we had 50 reports, I believe, in the RFP that we wanted replicated. And then we realized, well, most of those reports were really designed to check for accuracy. We didn't need them anymore because the system was going to take care of a good portion of that. So our reports really weren't they were helpful, but typically if we want to report, I'd go to Kirsten and say, get a SQL statement, get me this, I want this information, I want it tomorrow. And then it would put undue stress on Kirsten to get us that information. So the reporting system in the legacy system wasn't very good, and it really was designed around accuracy of data. We have 10 maintenance areas in the state of Montana. So take Montana, which is a sort of a rectangle, not a very good rectangle, but a rectangle, and divide it into 10 areas, and that's about what you can see for our maintenance areas. We have 10 maintenance areas, and in each maintenance areas we had staff that spent a lot of time entering data into Oracle from these spreadsheets, these newfangled spreadsheets that we did in the early 90s. And then they also did a lot of checking with labor hours, cross-checking for time, labor time to our electronic timesheet to make sure that MMS and ETS match. So it was very labor intensive. That actually took about 2 to 2.5 days every pay period, every 2 weeks. For us to accomplish. Legacy was prone to error because of quadruple data entry. I kid you not, quadruple. So we had our maintenance techs. They would write down on a piece of paper what they did that day. Whether they wrote down well or accurate or even legible was up to debate. They would give that to the section man. The section man would collect all these sheets of paper. He would put them onto a spreadsheet. He would send that spreadsheet into the office. The office would enter that into Oracle, and then then when they were done, we would essentially close out the system for that pay period. Our data was 3 weeks behind at best. It was probably more like 4 or 5 for every pay period. And the most important thing that wanted us to get rid of this is it was 40 years old. We got our money's worth, so it was good. So the new system and how is it saving us time and money really is kind of the purpose of this slide. So this is a drawing that, is Shafula here? He's not, but I'm sure this gives him nightmares and shudders. This is our interface drawing for the implementation. These are all the interfaces that we had designed into the system, including we had the equipment system, the financial system, our timesheet system, and a few others. But the equipment, when we first went live, or were proposing to go with this, was going to be an interface, not the same system. So I'm going to be talking about the interfaces and how they saved us money. I'm going to talk a little bit about time entry, and then I want to talk a little bit about the future of what I'm planning to do with this system and sort of the further savings that I do believe that we're going to find with the maintenance management system. So here's the newfangled spreadsheet that we use to collect in the legacy system. Couple things that were a massive issue, and I want to spend a little bit of time to walk through it because it's important to understand our savings. You have to understand our legacy system. So for every activity, we had a number, and on those numbers, we would input the employee hours, the units completed, the employee hours, the equipment that was driven, and the location of that activity. So we have, right now, we have about 500,000 data sets in our new maintenance management system. I think to this day, that was probably a little more ambitious. I'm glad we did it, but it was very ambitious. But the reason is because when we would do work, we would say we did work on this route on a guardrail. But oftentimes, especially in Montana, guardrail could be on both sides of the road, and we wouldn't know which guardrail we worked on. Not only that is we wouldn't know necessarily what sign was replaced or when it was replaced. And so we were having some issues because we didn't get down into the weeds or into we had aggregate data, but we didn't have that granular data that we needed in many instances for defense of tort claims or even to the legislature. So we had a location issue rather than an actual asset or an inventory issue. The other thing that we had was equipment. Even though this doesn't seem like a big deal, we simply registered our equipment by class. So he used, in this instance, for 5201, I don't remember what that is, yard work? Yeah, he used a pickup. 71 is a pickup, but I don't know which pickup he used. In this section, they have 3 or 4 pickups. Why is that important? Well, it can be important if we're looking at instances where did we take that truck out and sand it, or is that truck giving us issues with materials when we do snowplow? And that'll come more to light when I get a little further into it. But so we didn't have the equipment; it wasn't down to the granular scale. Labor costs. It was a massive issue. So we did crew averages. That was the only way we could do it. So we didn't go down to what employee did what. We simply did these 3 employees did this work, and here's the average. Now, like most DOTs, and those of you in maintenance will probably nod your head, you can do some cost recovery. So if someone hits your guardrail, slides off the road, smacks your guardrail, you can actually go after their insurance company and recover the cost to fix that asset. So when we use, and by the way, when that happened, that usually happened late at night, early in the morning, and the guy that got called out was a section man, the highest paid guy in the garage that worked there. Yet his time for that got charged as the crew average. Okay, average, right? Highest paid, lowest paid, somewhere in the middle is the average. So we did not collect all of our cost recoveries from that because we used crew average. Materials. This was a nightmare. We had absolutely no link to any of our systems. So it was simply handwritten requisition sheet. He'd say, yep, I use 4 posts. You hand in the stalker, and the stalker would take that off of inventory. In other words, he would use it from a inventory account and put it into a used on the road account. Okay? So we're lucky if the guy remembered to put it down. Also, we had our stalkers, the guys in charge of inventory in the 10 areas, they would often just issue the material. So when a guy would come in and say, I need 40 posts, I'm going to use 2 on a work order, and then I'll keep 38 in the yard, in my yard, so I have it on hand. The stalker would issue all 40 of those out. So going from a inventory account to a used on the road account, and then the stalker would say, don't worry about putting that on MMS. So we would not necessarily capture the costs. We'd capture the cost of the inventory because it got moved to the correct account, but we wouldn't capture that cost for that work activity at that time or where that location was. So we couldn't see hot spots, issues on the road that we maybe could do something better in construction. Each crew member filled out a mini. Whether or not the section man could read it was a different story. The section man would put that all in the Excel spreadsheet, and then central office would close the system out every 2 weeks. And again, we were always at least 3 weeks behind, and that's an issue. I'll get to it in a minute, but people would often say, gee, how much did that cost you? And my response typically was, I'll tell you in 3 weeks. And that's not a good response to have when you're talking to decision makers. So what does the new MMS system do? The new MMS system eliminates the paperwork. It's gone. We enter our information directly into work orders. You guys are familiar with this if you have an MMS system. Enters it into our day cards. There's one single point of entry, and the guy who's actually doing the work is the guy that's doing the data entry. There still is data checks. So the section supervisor goes through and approves, makes sure that everything is correct in the work order. And as I told the section supervisors, it's their job to make sure there's no errors. And then the superintendent, who is the next guy in line who checks this, it's their job to find the errors and correct them. So we have at least 2, sometimes 3 people checking our work orders and making sure it's correct. Before, it was nobody. In fact, we just had an audit done, and at one point, on the old system, not the new system, and at one point the auditor says, don't you guys even look at this data? Like, yeah, we do. Apparently not well enough. So now we have more accountability with our sections and more accountability from the guys actually doing the work. So what does that mean? So we reduced the double entry, quadruple entry really, from 32 hours a week. Again, this is just in the office. 32 hours a week down to 0. Okay, so remember the gals in the office would get those spreadsheets. They would enter those into Oracle, and that would take roughly 2 days every pay period. Now it's 0 hours. There is absolutely no no checking or no entry into Oracle from the office. So what we're saving is about 3,800 hours of more productive activity for those folks to do. At their pay grade, that's about a $93,000 savings on day one from implementation. And we'll be saving this for now, for basically as long as we have the system. So that's the savings for dual entry or quadruple entry, but there's also savings for our interfaces. And I am going to talk about the EVMS as if it were an interface, even though it's really not. It's the same system. And we did find some interesting things that occurred, and I'll highlight here, with combining those on one platform. First off, we had a daily usage sheet, and these are sheets that were in every vehicle. We have 4,000 vehicles roughly in the state. In every state, there's a book of these, 105 forms, I believe, and every day, every 2 weeks, people fill these out with the account information, the usage that they had, and they would initial and sign their U numbers. And then we would hand that paper in to the division offices every 2 weeks. They would fill that out in EVMS and would enter the usage. Now, the equipment program in Montana is a proprietary program, which means they charge everybody who uses their equipment. Sounds a little bit like ISD in our department. But so the usage is part of the charge, just like a rental. So when you go out, you pay a rental rate just to rent the car, and then you typically pay by miles. We're no different, exactly the same kind of concept. So this is how the equipment program bills us every 2 weeks, is by putting in the usage. And they put in the odometer and how many days they used, and then someone would write this down, then the supervisor would check it, and then they'd send it into the office, and the office, you guys get it, okay? A lot of repetitive work. Typically, this took anywhere from 12 to 16 hours to collect every sheet across the state of Montana and to enter this into the system. So now, with the new system, part of the interface is we did want to bring over usage from our MMS work orders, and that's actually something that we were very successful in doing. What happens now is that on our work order, if a piece of equipment was used, it comes over as MMS days used. Now, why would we do that? Why wouldn't we just have it come over as days used? Well, they have construction, we have core drill, we have geotech, we have planning. They all use equipment as well. Unfortunately, they still use the forms. So we have to, when we designate this, we have to designate the difference between if a maintenance person used the vehicle or if someone else in the department used the vehicle. So we have the MMS days used. That was a nice little interface that was built for us. And now all the guys really have to do is they have to enter the odometer reading and they have to enter the project agreement. Excuse me, the cost coding, excuse me. So the section man enters this directly in the system. The area office simply checks the coding now. And so what took anywhere from 12 to 16 hours now takes the office folks 6 to 8 hours. And again, most of that is because they're still entering slips in for construction, for geotech, for planning, for people who aren't in the system. But what does that mean for our savings? Well, that's about 8 hours of savings average every 2 weeks in each of the areas. We have 10 areas. You do the math, it's about 1,900 hours of saving. And remember, 2080 is about a FTE, so that's about 1 FTE savings, or about $4,600 or $46,000 gain in efficiency from here on out. And again, that was basically on week 1 when we implemented. We saw a dramatic, even with the learning curve, we saw a dramatic decrease of time with entering our usage. Another handy thing that we were able to do because we combined the system on a platform is our maintenance techs, probably like most of yours, will PM some of our vehicles. PM simply means oil change or adding grease to something called a Zerk. I've never seen a Zerk. I don't know what a Zerk is, but I like saying Zerk. So we call those PM1s or PMGs. PMGs is where we have Zerks. So they would actually enter this on the usage slip here. They would enter how many quarts of oil they used, what the odometer was when they did this. Now, this is the epitome of inefficiency. We would hand those in. our front office people would enter in the usage like I explained on the previous slide, but then they would hand those to the shop superintendent. The shop superintendent would then scan through each one of those, collect every sheet that there was a PM done, and then he would enter what they call a commercial repair order in our fleet management system to show that that equipment was properly maintained and got the PM. So they would actually do the work, they would write the work down, then the shop superintendent would scan through the paperwork, add that work into the fleet management system, and then enter it into the system. And it took, this is by the way, a very conservative estimate. The gentleman I asked is probably one of the best shop superintendents in the state. I said, how long does it usually take you to do that? He said, oh, about 30 minutes. I think it probably took most of the shop superintendents about an hour to an hour and a half. But saved on average about 30 minutes a week for every shop superintendent. That's pretty big. That's an hour, or excuse me, that's 30 minutes a week, or 30 minutes every 2 weeks, or an hour every month that they can be doing other repairs on our equipment and getting the equipment back on the road faster so that we can do more work. So, what do we do now? Like I said, we enter directly in the system. Because we went on the same system platform, we're able to actually access and grant permission to our section supervisors to enter the information into fleet management system here, where they can enter that they did some work, a PM. The vendor is us, so MDT is the vendor, and they enter that in. And now all the shop superintendent has to do is simply approve that and say, yep, that work was done. He confirms it, and then the equipment, there's a record that the equipment was properly PM'd. So there's no double data entry, and again, there's single point of entry, which is sort of a common theme with implementing maintenance management in Montana. So what does that mean? We have actually 17 shops throughout the state. Even though we have 10 areas, we have a few satellite shops. But if you think about that, that's an hour a month in each shop. That's 17 hours every month that we save, or 204 hours a year. At the shop superintendent's rate, that's about $12,000 in savings. And that one, I would say that's real savings, because that's something that they can do to get our equipment back on the road faster so that we can do our work and be more efficient. That's $12,000 in savings every year as a result of this interface. All right, so now let's talk about real interfaces. So this one was a fun one. This was our electronic timesheet. Our electronic timesheet is a homegrown system. At some point, we'll be moving to Sabres, but right now it's a homegrown system. And if you mess with the timesheet in Montana, you think that the world will stop spinning. You think that the volcanoes everywhere will erupt, and time as we know it will end. And that's how it was dealing with our administration folks. Timesheet was the holy of holies. We can't touch it. Do not do anything with it. I assured them that AgileAssets knew what they were doing, to trust me. I said, please trust me. Lo and behold, AgileAssets came through with a fantastic interface for us, which I'll explain here. And this is a picture of the old timesheet system from the legacy, or this is actually currently what we use, but what is fed actually is the MMS data is fed into this. So in the old system, what we used to do in the legacy was to write our hours on the Mini 70s that you saw, that paperwork. So the guys would say, yep, I worked 6 hours on this work order, 8 hours on this one, did some overtime, plowed roads till midnight, whatever. And then they would have to then re-enter this information into their electronic timesheet. Every 2 weeks, then there was a report where the offices reconciled the differences between the MMS labor and the ETS hours, total hours, and they had to run that and reconcile that every 2 weeks. They did that for 2 hours. And then they spent, which I don't have on here, an additional hour sort of tracking down any errors. If they didn't balance, they would call sections and say, hey, you're not balancing, you've missed some hours here. Where are they? So we had to have our MMS balance, our electronic timesheets. That was something that we inherited from an administrator years before to help ensure for some data accuracy. So now what do? When we enter in our time, What we did is we used our time reporting code, which is an option that's in the standard product for AgileAssets, but we used our codes, our TRC codes. So what happens is that when we use overtime, that overtime is recognized by our electronic timesheet, and it goes over seamlessly. If we use regular time, it's recognized because we're using the same codes. So all the edits that used to occur on the front end with balancing MMS and ETS, they don't have to occur anymore because now all the edits are occurring in the maintenance management system, and they're occurring on the timesheet side. So both systems match. There's no need to do any kind of reconciliation, and there's no need to spend the 3 hours a week in every one of the areas to ensure that that was the case. So what does that mean? For us, it means a cost savings of 3 hours on average every 2 weeks for each area. That's 720 hours, or about a half of a FTE per year for other work. If you put that dollar amount to it, it's $17,000 worth of savings each and every month, or excuse me, each and every year for as long as we have the system. The next interface is inventory. This is has been the bane of my existence. I do not, well, I like accountants just fine, but accountants are a funny bunch, and they like numbers more than I do, which is somewhat of a surprise. But balancing the old inventory system in MMS was almost an impossibility because there was no link to it. It was simply a paper trail, and not a very good paper trail at that. Now, what we ended up using in the resource module was the inventory element of it, the materials element, and that is our material system. And as a matter of fact, we're going to bring on 2 other organizations within our department, Core Drill and Traffic, and we're going to eliminate our old system together, which I'm not even talking about the benefit of not having to maintain an old system for ISD, but that's going to be a huge benefit. So we're going to eliminate a system here probably in 6 months. I'm looking at my program manager because she's like, don't you do it now. It's been a lot of work. So here's the paper requisition. When we used any material on MMS, we would fill in this requisition. This is also used quite often for those recovery instances where somebody hit a guardrail. We'd have to actually get an accurate cost of the post that we use or the guardrail end that we use so we could bill insurance agencies. And so there was a lot of time between the stalker and the sections calling and asking what the price was. And the stalker, usually the section man would say, hey, what's the price on a post? And the stalker would say, well, it depends what post did you use? And then they'd spend the next 5 minutes talking about numbers that I have no idea what they are to figure out what post that was used on the work order. So paper requisition form were used. There was no interface between MMS and the store system, which actually did cause us some issues. Here's an example. We did a state project with state forces where we did some crack sealing. The stalker issued out, maybe a month before that project, issued out the crack seal, the material. And when asked about it, the stalker said, oh, don't worry, don't put it on your MMS, I already issued it out. You don't need to put it on the MMS. So they went out, they did a crack seal, and it was one of the most efficient crack seals we've ever done because there was no material costs in the crack seal. It was simply labor and equipment. So it did give us fits not having the 2 systems linked. Now, if they're going to use it on a work order, it's got to be in their inventory. If it's in their inventory, they can count it at the end of the year, make sure they have the right amount, and they can keep track. And it's instantly, when we use it on a work order, and click the approve button, it's instantly taken off inventory, so we have an accurate count of our inventory, which is huge for us in Montana, especially for winter maintenance. So we'd run reconciliation reports between MMS and our store system. Again, that would take the office folks about 2 hours. The stalkers, it would take quite a bit of time as well. So now what do? We have our inventory in our resource module, and we use that on our material day cards, and it comes off our inventory instantly. So this is a screenshot of our our inventory module here in the upper one, and then down here is our material usage on our day cards. So what does that mean for savings? So our stockers would spend, on average, about 5 hours a week, every week. So now it allows them more time to actually ensure that inventory control, invoicing, and some other things that sort of fall by the wayside. We have 11 stockers across the state of Montana. That's about 2,800 hours a year in savings, or about $104,000, $105,000 each and every year. Office saves about an hour a week because they don't have to reconcile the maintenance management system and the store's inventory system anymore, and that's about $11,000 a year. So what does all this mean? How much time and money are we saving in Montana? So for each of these double entry, these interfaces here, we total up to about 10,000 hours. Just of our office stockers and maintenance shop superintendent time. And that opens up, about $286,000 a year every year. Now, I didn't include any of the efficiencies that we had with our maintenance techs and our shop or our section supervisors in each of the shop. I have 125 sections across the state of Montana, about 800 employees. If this system saves them 1 hour a week, which I don't think I think that's a very conservative estimate. If it saves them 1 hour a week, that's almost 50,000 hours a year at a cost of $1.4 million in savings of other work that we can be doing. Now, and I'll talk a little bit about that here at the end, but so all I've really considered is savings for the double entry and savings in the offices. I haven't considered any of the savings for the folks that are actually doing the work. But I will talk about that here at the end. So the trifecta, adding value. So I've talked about saving time and I've talked about the saving money, and here's the value of what we have. Real-time reporting. I'll talk about our most severe record, or winter that we've had on record. And anybody who wants to talk about skiing afterwards, come see me. Talk about real-time inventory. This has been huge for us, incredibly important. Again, linking with our winter we had this year, it becomes extremely important. I want to talk about our using the reports as a management tool, something that's a bit of a novel concept for our chiefs, but they're getting behind it, and I think that they'll be using it quite a bit. And then some of the future work that I'm going to do to continue calculating the costs and the savings that we've garnered from implementing the maintenance management system. So we had the worst winter on record. We had 7 or 8 major storms that closed off roads throughout the state at any given time. And so when I was preparing this, which was at the beginning of April, we had spent about $29.63 million just for snow removal activities. The closest day or the closest year we had to that was $27.5 million. Our average is usually about $23 million. I had more phone calls. My boss had more phone calls than we've ever had from media saying, hey, that storm hit you statewide. What did that cost you? And I said, well, give me 5 seconds. Type it in, and I could get the cost by that storm, by the date. I could get labor, equipment, material, which is how we report our costs to the legislators and the media, and I could get that within 5 minutes. It was real time. Okay. This, by the way, I just pulled the numbers last week. We're up to almost 31 million. We'll be over $31 million by the end. And one of the roads that we clear every year is something called the Beartooth Highway. It's closed from I'd say October to Memorial Day, and then opened up. And it's a beautiful highway. It goes over the Beartooth Mountains. Goes over the Beartooth Mountains between Montana and Wyoming. It's one of the corridors to get into Yellowstone National Park. I think the elevation at the top is about 10.5, so it's very high up. and that effort hasn't even started yet. So that's usually about a $500,000 effort to open that one road for tourists. So we'll be well over $31 million. But again, the ability to give real-time reporting is adding value in a way that we never had before without the AgileAssets maintenance management system. Real-time inventory, this is huge. So this is a graphical example. This, by the way, you all have access to this right out of the box. It's not hard. You guys can build graphs. I like graphs. I do like numbers. It may not seem like I do because I've been slamming economists and accountants, but this is the kind of numbers I like. And this allows you to quickly look at our salt sand that we have remaining in our stockpiles in the state of Montana. Actually, this is just one section. This is the Missoula section. Because it was such a big year, we're basically empty. We're going to have a big year for contracting for more salt sand. But if you think about it, that is about 1,500, 1,600 yards of material, which is maybe 3 good storms worth of material. And that's the highest I have. So most of the stockpiles I have are well under 300 yards of material. So we're running low. And instantly we can start to look at, okay, who's got stock? And if we have a storm, how can we get that stock to the area that needs it? So we are more efficient now because we know exactly what we have. The other example that I have is cutting edges. So those of you in a northern state will understand cutting edges are a carbide tip that goes on a snowplow, allows you to basically cut the snow off the road. And for some reason, nationwide, every year, there's a shortage. I think it's manufactured, but a shortage. And so we always are trying to find out who's got the cutting edges, who's hoarding them, and get them to the places that need them. 2 examples of having real-time inventory that's paid us dividends. The management tool. This is something that opened up eyes of a lot of our maintenance chiefs and has been important. And this is what people are doing out in the field. So this is a out-of-the-box report. I think this is an activity analysis report that we created by date. So every week, our chiefs now are running what activities did our garages do for that week so they can see what they're doing and if they're prioritizing correctly. Here's an example. I drove down an interstate highway, and it's been a long winter, as I keep inferring. Drove down an interstate highway, and we had our sections putting up a green sign, and the green signs mean informational, I believe, informational sign. And it was a big sign, and they were diligently working on that. As I drove down the road a little further, there was a guardrail that was down. The ETN was just was mangled, and if you ever see an ETN hit on a guardrail, go watch the Texas Institute where they test all those. It's kind of cool, but you know the guardrail spins through the head, and it's just a mangled mess. So there was a mess of guardrail that was damaged, and then down another mile, there was another guardrail that was damaged. And I started to think, why are these guys putting up a sign when I've got guardrail damage? And, you know, sign, informational sign, stop sign, I get it. But informational sign is probably not the best use of their time at that time. They should probably be fixing the guardrail. So I got on to that section and looked at what they were doing. And they were doing a lot of that kind of work where they weren't necessarily being attentive to guardrail. And I called the chief and said, hey, you might want to think about this. Here's an example of report that I used to look at this, and here's why I even noticed it in the first place. He calls me back, and he was laughing. He was laughing not because of anything particularly funny, but he'd be crying otherwise if not. But he said, yeah, I talked to my section man, and the section man said, there was a lot of snow, and I didn't want to shovel behind the guardrail. And he starts laughing again, and I said, yeah, and then I told my section man, we're in the snow removal business. It's okay. We can get the snow out from behind the guardrail. Anyway, that story, what that really highlights is that we can start looking at what our guys are doing and when they're doing it, and we can become more efficient and get more things done in a year than we ever have before because we can catch issues like that. And one more example of management, again, it goes back to guardrail. Not only did I notice that there was a lot of guardrail down, our federal partners in Montana noticed as well. And they said, gee, how long is it taking you guys to fix this guardrail statewide? And so very rapidly we could actually run a series of reports and get some information to look at how long it took for us to fix guardrail from the moment it was hit to the moment we actually got it fixed. That allowed me to say, yeah, it's not taking much longer than it has before, and you got to remember it was a heavy winter, and they were satisfied with that information. But it gives us the ability to understand what we're doing, when we're doing it, and if we're doing the right thing at the right time. So the future, one of the things that I do want to look at is the time savings that we're getting in the field. I do believe that we're saving more than an hour a week for every employee, but I'm going to look at that. And the way I'm going to look at that is by the work that we do out on the road. And my premise is that what we should see in the old system versus the new system is more work, more time being spent on doing stuff on the road than doing things like planning and scheduling and doing some of the paperwork. And so we should be able to see that. The reason that's in the future study is we implemented in October. Our state fiscal year, like most of yours, is July 1 through June 30th. And this year I sort of wrote off as a bit of a wash because we had a learning curve. We're teaching, implemented a new system, and the guys are getting used to it. So starting July 1 of this year, we're actually going to start looking at what it is that we've done and are we doing more work on the road. The second thing is prioritization of work. I gave you two great examples of prioritization. That we have gained from just running reports every week and knowing what our guys are doing, basically having real-time data at our fingertips. And the gains of efficiencies that we're doing this is another thing that we're going to look at is, are we doing the right treatment at the right time, the right maintenance activity at the right time? Are we being more proactive than reactive? And then the last thing, and this is the one I'm really excited about, is I want to use MMS to feed design. So what I mean by that is, if you've ever looked, if you have your inventory set up, there is something called maintenance history. You can click on that, a hyperlink comes up, and you can see every little work order that was ever done on that asset, whatever that asset was. What I'm going to try to do is get a report that when a designer's going in, they're going to do a rebuild on a road, that they can say, let me look at every asset between this milepost and this milepost and every work order that's ever been done on that asset. And then they can filter and do some things with that once they get that report. For example, one of the things that I've been asking our guys to do is make sure that when they're what we call babysitting drifts, it blows a little bit in Montana, and we get lots of drifts. In fact, I think on the Blackfoot Reservation up in the High Line this year, we had about 20-foot drifts on a road. And so these guys were, our maintenance techs were babysitting them. They would drive through, bust them out, and then do a little snow removal, come back, bust them out. What I've asked them to do is when they do that, in those work where they're babysitting drifts, is to put those point locations on their work order. And the reason is because if there's a possibility for design to say, hey, these guys are doing a lot of work, snow removal, right at this point, I wonder why. Or even better yet, let me pick up the phone and give them a call. They understand now that they're babysitting a drift, and then the designer can say, maybe I can put a snow fence in. Maybe I can make it easier for us to maintain the road and for us to do things so that we can do it more efficiently at less cost and saving us time and money. So the last thing, I actually spent last night thinking about your presentation, you always do, going over your head, how can I be funny, how can I give you the information that you guys want and deliver it. And then I thought about what Stuart asked. And Stuart asked of his organization, client happiness, his wildly important goal, his WIG. His wildly important goal of client happiness and then employee happiness. And I was thinking, was I happy? Was I happy with this? And I think I would say, for the most part, I am very pleased that we implemented this system. For the most part, I'm very excited to be able to get information immediately. I'm very excited to be able to show that we're saving time and money. and adding value. So am I happy with this new system? I would say absolutely I am. So. Last, I want to acknowledge a few of the folks on the implementation team. Brandy Hamilton, who couldn't be here, Kirsten and Michelle, who are sitting here with me today, Matt Ladenburg, who I call the PhD of all the maintenance chiefs. He was awfully fun to have on the system, or on the implementation team. Mike Warren and Tamuna were our project managers. Tony Etherington was our business case and analyst. And then, of course, a special thank you to all of the AgileAsset Montana team who did a fine job for us. We do appreciate it. You gave us a great product, so thank you.
Sure. Any questions? Okay, great. That's a great build off of what Stuart was talking about, a lot of the foundation right there of kind of adding those up little pieces at a time. And as I was kind of peeling back the onion, I thought, boy, that's just at the tip. Because you start thinking about saving time so people are putting equipment more efficiently back into the field, that could impact the number of pieces of equipment that you need at the DOT. Yeah. So when you get better utilization, you reduce actual even inventory, equipment inventory costs, right? You start adding those up, and it's substantial, the amount of value that comes on those things. So.
Absolutely.
We're going to open it up now for questions. We have Slido.com for those of you on the streaming, as well as here that would like to be anonymous. But we also have a time right now. Any questions or comments or thoughts about your own DOT or questions for Doug?
So a couple of good questions, it looks like. Does the fleet management system schedule PM work orders based on usage, or does work still need to be created by someone? So we do create work orders by our odometer readings for the PM1s, and PMGs are, I think, time on task, I believe, for greasing the Zerk. Thank you for letting me say Zerk again. So they are scheduled by usage. There is a report that comes, I think it's called overdue PM, that the chiefs will, or that the shop superintendents will send out and basically scold people for not doing the PM when they need to do it. But if you go into any of the offices, typically on the whiteboard they'll have their mileage and when the PMs are due. They still like to write it down, even though there's a report that they can get out of the system and get it. Do you interface with MMS inventory with an external procurement system and or financial system? Procurement system, no. Financial system, yes, we do. In fact, we have a lot of our interfaces that gave me fits was with our homegrown financial system. It's called CARES. I can't remember what that stands for. Do you guys recall? It's our homegrown financial system. And getting an accountant to sit down and explain what they need and when they need it is like an act of God. It takes quite a bit of time, and they don't even think it through. So we were actually making changes to our process, I think 2 weeks before we went live, for our mixing process with our accounting system to deal with an accounting issue. And the quick story on that is when we use our inventory, we want to make that switch from inventory account into used on the road account. So the one thing that we forgot was mixing activities. Mixing activities is using inventory to make inventory. So when we set up the system, we said, gee, so every time we use this inventory, we're going to use it, right, accountants? And they went, yep. And then 2 weeks before they went live, they went, except for this. And then their response was, gee, can't you just go to Agile and ask them? I'm like, no, I can't go to Agile and ask them. So anyway, and then are we using laptops in the field? Yes, we are. In fact, we ended up getting, that was an expenditure that we had to make. We ended up having, I think, one computer for every 2 FTE is sort of the formula that we used. And the computers that we bought were laptops. However, we're in 7. 7 isn't mobile unless you have internet access. So we did give a tablet-style laptop to a few of the areas that are in urban. There are urban areas in Montana. A few of the areas that are urban in Montana, and they're actually going out. And this summer, I'm gonna spend some time training them to actually get online to get through MMS to see if we actually want to do mobile. So they'll sort of be my test group to see if we want to do mobile in the future. How are your frontline maintenance employees entering their information, tablets, desktops, or other? So right now, again, they're using laptops and desktops to enter their information. So they are in some ways still writing down what they are doing, taking that piece of paper. We haven't avoided that altogether. They take that back and they put that information into the system. So.
Okay, some additional questions from the audience here. You know, any other agency, let me ask an agency, any other agency gone through the process, something similar to what Doug has done here in terms of trying to capture the return on the investment of some of these? It's a good model to follow. I recall in the early days with TxDOT, there was the collections. I think, is Brandy here by chance? Hey, Brandy. I remember that there was the insurance collections, the recovery. There was something about recovery where it was just to go from, maybe there's a cost a certain amount of money to go chase the insurance claim, and then by reducing it down to $0 or $50, it really changed the money coming into TxDOT by, I think, millions of dollars, if I remember correctly. So it's that kind of things that can really show where the value of the system is substantial. And that framework that the NCHRP has put together to kind of build off on that Stuart was talking about. So,
actually able to go from estimating.
let me, just because of live streaming, let me go ahead and get the audio.
So what we were able to do was we had the office manager creating the work orders and entering all the actuals, and then the office manager had to turn around and create an estimate for damage claims. But now all he or she has to do is print out a work order details report with all the costs on it and attach that to the damage claim, and we've eliminated some steps in there. So we are actually going after a lot more damage claims than we did in the past.
Yeah, we have something similar. So now with the projects, so we set up a project for every, what we call ARs, account recoveries. And for every project, we have a number, and then we have a report that runs and shows every work order, who worked on it, what equipment was used, and then there's sort of at the end, sort of a summary of labor, equipment, material, and contracted costs that we can present to the insurance companies for recovery. I haven't tracked what a recovery is. I don't know what a recovery in the past is, but that's something that I'll actually now I'm planning to do. So,
I remember it was a lot of money, that's for sure. Charles, let me make sure we capture the audio.
What made you decide not to turn on the automated PM notification system for your repair services?
Charles, that's an excellent question. One I can't answer, but I do have someone in the crowd who can.
It's turned on to Michelle.
We in our fleet system, we do have an automated preventive maintenance system that does notification on all of our equipment that is due for preventive maintenance. We also send out every 2 weeks from our AgileAssets system to all the section supervisors that lets them know where the equipment is and when it's due for preventive maintenance. And that's a report that is set up and then automatic emailed every 2 weeks on a time schedule in the fleet management system.
However, one of the things, I don't know if you were in, so to put a plug in for communities, is that you can put an idea in and vote for it. And so one of the ideas that we put in was to put notifications by security level, so that if there are notifications in the system, that we can send that out to security, and that's a fairly natural extension of the report, is that we can send that out directly to the folks who have the overdue PM on it. So if you like that idea, go and vote for it, because then it will bubble up to the top and then get put into the next version.
Doug gets it. He gets the system now. Okay, well, we are out of time. One more time, thank you so much, Doug.